I am 32 years old now, and though my life has come a long way, there's still a part of me that feels a weight, a heaviness, whenever I think about my family, especially my father and my younger brother. These days, I have a successful career as a chef, a restaurant that's doing well, and a loyal team who supports me. But none of this came easily, and it certainly didn't come from the support of my family. If anything, my success is a testament to everything I've had to overcome, especially when it comes to the rejection and favoritism I faced from the two men who should have been my closest allies, my father and my brother. I was born first, to a man who had big plans for me, just not the ones I ever had for myself. My father, let's call him Carl, is a hard man. He's always been a traditionalist, someone who valued strength and success in the conventional sense, athleticism, physical labor, and assertiveness. He grew up in a tough household and never had much, so the idea of having sons who could carry on the legacy and make something of themselves was incredibly important to him. He didn't just want us to succeed. He wanted us to succeed on his terms, in a way that mirrored the image of the man he saw himself as. In his eyes, that man was strong, a provider, someone who would never have anything less than perfect sons. My younger brother, Mark, was his golden child. From the moment Mark could walk, my father noticed something in him that was missing in me. Mark was rough and tumble, loved playing sports, and showed an early aptitude for all the things that Dad cherished: physical endurance, toughness, and being competitive. Everything I wasn't. I, on the other hand, was a quieter child. I didn't like sports, didn't like getting my hands dirty, and most of all, I loved cooking. My mother had taught me how to cook when I was young, and that became my refuge. I spent hours in the kitchen with her, peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, learning how to make sauces and stews that tasted like home. My mother was an amazing cook, a woman with an innate sense of flavor, and I was so proud of the meals we created together. I admired the way she worked in the kitchen with such grace and confidence. But my father never understood any of this. To him, cooking wasn't something a man should be interested in. He would often tell me to stop wasting my time with feminine activities and try doing something useful. He never saw it as a skill, much less as a passion or a career path. Instead, he wanted me to be like Mark, to show an interest in the things he thought were important, to live up to the idea of manhood he had for both of us. I was never able to meet those expectations. As I grew older, the divide between my father and I only grew more apparent. Mark and I couldn't have been more different. While my brother and my father bonded over fishing trips, baseball games, and hours spent on the lawn mowing the grass, I felt like I was floating in the background, trying to fit into a world I didn't belong to. At some point, my father's comments became crueler, more pointed. He'd call me soft, a mama's boy, and tell me that real men didn't waste their time with trivial things like cooking or art. What hurt the most, though, was that he never seemed to care about me in the way he cared about Mark. Mark could do no wrong in his eyes, no matter what happened. If Mark came home with a B+ on a test, it was a proud moment in our house. When I came home with an A+, I was lucky if Dad even noticed. My achievements seemed to pale in comparison to my brother's. Mark was the son my father wanted, successful in all the ways that mattered to him, naturally gifted in sports, assertive, strong. Meanwhile, I was always the odd one, the disappointment, the one who didn't quite measure up. As if the neglect wasn't enough, my mother passed away when I was in 8th grade. It was an event that fundamentally changed our family. I was devastated. My world fell apart, and I didn't know how to handle it. But instead of supporting me during that time, my father retreated further into himself, as though burying his grief was the only way to cope. He didn't know how to show affection, how to comfort me, and he certainly didn't know how to express his own sorrow. The loss of my mother made things worse, amplifying the emotional distance between us. I found solace in the kitchen, cooking to distract myself from the pain. But my father wasn't there to support me. He never understood why I chose to spend so much time alone in the kitchen, away from the family. He saw it as me avoiding the real issues, as me retreating from reality. He didn't see it as a way for me to heal or cope. To him, it was just another sign that I wasn't living up to his vision of a strong, capable son. By the time I reached high school, things between my father and me were strained beyond repair. I was no longer the son he wanted. I was a disappointment in his eyes. Mark was everything he ever wanted, a carbon copy of the man my father had always aspired to be. There was no place for me in that vision. When it came time for me to start thinking about my future, I knew my father wouldn't support me. I had dreams that didn't align with his dreams that involved pursuing a career in cooking, going to culinary school, and maybe one day opening my own restaurant. But I knew those dreams would never be supported by him. After high school, I applied to several prestigious culinary schools. I knew that getting into one was my only real shot at making it in the culinary world. But there was a problem. Tuition. I had no way to pay for it. My father was never going to fund my education, not for something he deemed frivolous. He didn't think being a chef was a real job, much less a worthy aspiration. So I turned to my aunt. She had always been supportive, had always encouraged me to follow my heart, and she agreed to help me apply for loans to cover the costs. Still, the situation with my father was a constant source of tension. He outright refused to help me pay for school. He wasn't just unwilling, he actively discouraged me from pursuing my dreams. He told me that culinary school was a waste of time, that I would never make it, and that I should focus on something practical. He suggested I take a job in construction, something where I could actually build something. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had built a life for himself through sheer force of will and stubbornness, but none of that ever included understanding or supporting his children's passions. Despite his objections, I somehow made it to culinary school. But that was only the beginning of the battle. The next hurdle was my decision to leave home completely. I couldn't stay there any longer, not under his roof, not with the way he treated me. I moved in with my aunt and focused entirely on my studies. It wasn't easy, though. Culinary school was grueling, the hours long, the work exhausting. But every time I wanted to quit, every time I wanted to throw in the towel, I thought about my mother. She had always believed in me, always supported my dreams. I carried her spirit with me as I worked through the hardest parts of school. It wasn't just about cooking for me. It was about proving to myself that I could succeed on my own terms, without the approval of my father or anyone else. I worked tirelessly, and eventually I graduated near the top of my class. My determination had paid off. But I still hadn't figured out what to do about my father. He never apologized for how he treated me, never showed any remorse for the years of neglect and emotional manipulation. In fact, when I graduated, he didn't even show up. That was the final straw for me. I knew I would never get his approval, and honestly, I was done trying. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in me, it was that he actively sabotaged my dreams. It was that he never saw me as a person, but as some sort of extension of his own idealized version of masculinity. He never loved me for who I was. He loved me for what he wanted me to be. Years later, when I opened my first restaurant, it was a triumph, not just over the odds, but over the emotional scars I had from growing up in that household. I poured my heart and soul into my restaurant, creating a space where I could express myself freely. But despite all my success, my father and brother never reached out. They didn't congratulate me, didn't offer any kind of recognition. And honestly, it didn't matter. By then, I had come to terms with the fact that I had no family. My restaurant was everything to me, and it was mine, built from the ground up, without any help from those who were supposed to love me. The night of my restaurant's opening was one I'll never forget. I had worked for years to get to this point, years of grueling culinary school, long shifts in kitchens where I was just one of many, fighting for respect and recognition, only to face repeated setbacks and rejections. But through it all, the fire inside me never extinguished. That night was my chance to show the world that I had made it, not just for me, but for my mother. She would have been so proud. When I finally opened my restaurant, it felt like I had reached the pinnacle of my journey. I had poured my heart, soul, and every last bit of energy into this place. My dream had materialized into something tangible, a physical manifestation of everything I had worked for. The event itself was carefully planned. I had decided that I would invite the people who truly mattered to me, the ones who had supported me throughout my journey, who had been there for me when things got tough, and who had believed in me when my own family didn't. Of course, I had to invite my father and brother. I knew it wasn't going to be an easy evening, but I also knew that I had to face them sooner or later. After all, my success was something that they would never be able to ignore. The night was buzzing with energy. The space was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional soft sound of jazz music playing in the background. I took pride in the details, the cozy atmosphere, the elegant decor, the meticulous arrangement of food and drink. I had always believed that food wasn't just about taste, it was about creating an experience, one that involved all the senses. As my guests mingled, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I'd come. This place, this restaurant, was mine. It was everything I'd ever wanted. But as the evening wore on, I felt the tension between me and my family, palpable and thick. My father and brother had shown up, yes, but they were hardly the guests I was excited to see. To my surprise, they both managed to hold themselves together for the most part, engaging in polite conversation with the people I had invited. But there was an undeniable coldness between us. My father's eyes, once full of disapproval, now flickered with something else. Envy, maybe, or maybe resentment. He could see it now. I had done what he always told me I couldn't do. I had succeeded without his help, without his approval. And my brother, he wasn't any better. I overheard snippets of conversation between them and a few of the guests. They spoke highly of me, but there was an edge to their praise. They were trying to sound proud, but I could hear the undercurrent of jealousy in their voices. They were putting on a show, a mask of admiration, but I could tell. I could always tell. It didn't take long for the toast to begin. The night was winding down, and it was finally time for me to stand up and speak. I had prepared myself for this moment for years. I had always known that I would have my time, that I would finally have the chance to say what I had needed to say to my family. But when I stood up, I knew that this moment would not just be about gratitude, it would be about truth. My friends went first. They raised their glasses and spoke kind words about how proud they were of me, of how hard I had worked to get to this point. There were smiles, clapping, and a few heartfelt cheers. And then it was my turn. I raised my glass, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet, unburdened by anyone else's expectations. I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for being here tonight. I started, my voice steady and clear, and I want to raise my glass to my mother, the woman who gave me the strength to pursue my dreams. Without her, I wouldn't have had the courage to fight for what I wanted in life. She taught me to believe in myself, even when no one else did. There was a slight pause in the room. My mother had passed away years ago, but I felt her presence as if she were standing beside me. Her faith in me had never wavered, even in the face of my father's cruel indifference. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath before continuing. But there's one other person I need to thank, I said, my eyes flicking over to my father and brother. They were sitting at the far end of the room, their eyes fixed on me. I want to thank my family, because, despite everything, I wouldn't be here today without them. I could see my father and brother exchange glances. I knew they were expecting the typical speech, the one where I would acknowledge their sacrifices, their support, their role in helping me get to this point. But this wasn't that speech. I especially want to thank my father, I continued, my voice unwavering, because it was his refusal to believe in me, his complete lack of faith in what I was capable of, that forced me to find my own strength. If it weren't for him constantly telling me that I would never amount to anything, that I would never succeed at this feminine nonsense, I wouldn't have been pushed to prove him wrong. A hush fell over the room. I could see my father's face harden, his lips pressed into a tight line. My brother looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. The tension was thick, but I couldn't stop now. This was my moment to speak the truth, to say everything I had been holding inside for so many years. I also want to thank my younger brother, I went on, because his existence, his constant, unquestioned favoritism from our father, showed me exactly what I didn't want to be. It showed me what happens when someone believes they are entitled to everything simply because they fit into the mold that society expects. The room was silent, and I could feel the weight of every word I spoke. I watched as my father and brother exchanged glances again, their discomfort palpable. But I wasn't finished. I don't say this to hurt anyone, but to make something clear. Everything I have achieved has been because I didn't have their support. In fact, if anything, their treatment of me only fueled my desire to prove them wrong. And for that, they deserve a little credit, too, I added with a wry smile, raising my glass slightly. Thank you for being the obstacle I needed to overcome. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the uncomfortable rustling of people shifting in their seats, unsure of how to react. Some guests looked at each other, trying to gauge the mood. A few of them shot glances at my father and brother, whose faces were now as red as the wine in their glasses. They didn't know how to respond, but they had to smile, to act like nothing was wrong. After all, I had just publicly humiliated them. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. But then I walked over to my father and brother, forcing a smile on my face. I did the unthinkable. I hugged them. It was a forced gesture, a sickeningly sweet imitation of the family reunion I had always hoped for, but never received. I've forgiven you, I said, my voice loud enough for the room to hear. For everything. For not believing in me, for trying to stop me. I forgive you. I could see my brother's face twist in confusion, his lips trembling as if he was about to say something. My father's expression, though, was one of barely contained anger. But they couldn't protest, not here, not now. I had set the stage. And as a sign of goodwill, I added, the words dripping with sarcasm, I'd like to offer Mark a position at my restaurant. As the bartender. I'm sure he'll do an excellent job. The room erupted into awkward applause. People were clapping, some even whistling, but I could tell that it wasn't the heartfelt response it appeared to be. They didn't know the truth that my brother wasn't actually being offered a real opportunity. No, this was my way of humbling them, of showing them just how little they meant to me now. The evening ended with a kind of hollow cheer, a mix of forced smiles and confused murmurs. As the guests began to filter out, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not because of the applause, but because I had finally done it. I had said everything that needed to be said. But the real test came once the last guest had left. As I stepped outside to lock up, I was met with the fury of my father and brother. "Explain yourself," my father growled, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell was that?" I didn't flinch. "That was me paying you back for every word you've ever said to me," I replied calmly. "For every time you belittled me, for every time you tried to crush my dreams." "You're welcome." My brother's face contorted with rage, his fists clenched. "You humiliated us," he yelled. "Why the hell would you do that?" "I told you," I said, my voice cold, "because you both deserve it. And honestly, I don't care if you ever understand." I could hear my brother's breath catch in his throat, a sign that he was about to break. I didn't care. I had moved on from them long ago. I turned to leave, but my brother shouted after me, "You'll regret this. You'll regret pushing us away." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That was a few days ago. I haven't heard from them since, and honestly, I don't expect to. The silence is nice. Peaceful. It's the first time in my life I've felt truly free of their influence. My aunt, however, thinks I may have gone too far. She says I should have just kicked them out right away, but I don't think so. This was a long time coming. They had their chance to apologize, to make things right. They didn't take it. So now, they get to live with the consequences of their actions. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.